Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory.
Once I knew a priest in New York. He was in his last year of seminary and he was ordained a priest a little ahead of time so he could get used to being a priest and not just be shipped off somewhere. And during that time, he did some parish ministry, but also he worked at a hospital for chaplaincy. And it was during this that he had a visit with a particular patient. She was struggling with some sort of chronic affliction. I don't know if it was illness or just something that was bothering her. But instead of getting to know her and taking things easy, he immediately jumped, of course, to the good news, but abrupt news of the resurrection of Christ and his triumph over death. But rightly, this person was a bit taken aback at jumping straight ahead to that. And she asked an amazing question. That's great for Jesus, but what about me? This is actually a really important question. This is the most important question I find. With our faith, with the Holy Scriptures, with all of it, it's healthy for us to ask questions. If we don't ask questions, we find that we sometimes don't learn anything. And in the life of the church, we've heard today in the gospel the words of Christ taken from St. Matthew. But he uses two different terms to describe the church, two terms that are worth asking questions of. He calls us light and he calls us salt. Light, obviously, illuminates a space. It drives away darkness. It has connotations of truth. Darkness, lies, these things are synonymous, really. We're told today in the gospel that we are the light of the world. Not that we could be the light of the world, we should be, but we are. He's telling something about ourselves. We have light that's meant to illuminate. But again, let's question, what is light in the ancient world? In the ancient world, in one way or another, light means fire. Fire is a tool. It keeps us warm, it can keep us safe, it cooks our food, but fire is also dangerous. It's dangerous because by its very nature, fire is meant to grow. It needs fuel. Fire isn't something that we can keep in a candle forever. It either has to spread or, in one way or another, it dies. Thankfully, the light of our Christian faith, our Catholic faith, it can't hurt us. If our faith expands, it can only grow and only grow. We're meant to pass it on to other people. We're meant to set the world ablaze with the light of our Catholic faith. If we lose the faith, our candle goes out. If we don't tend to it, if we're not careful to nurture the flame that's so easily destroyed by wind, then it can go with us. And sometimes it just happens. People find themselves in a dark place and they don't see the light that they themselves have. In the gospel, Christ says that we shouldn't hide our light. Well, I don't know anyone who hides the light of their candles, puts it under a table, things like that. No one would ever really do that. It costs money. It's an investment. But again, let us ask the question, the light of our faith. Do we hide the light? Do we obscure our faith? Is the church the only place and time that we ever talk about our faith openly? Is it the only time that we share our faith with others, that we find ourselves open to faith? Maybe yes, it may be no. So far, the metaphor of light is very understandable. We see it, we can understand it. The next word, salt, is a bit more complex. Salt in the ancient world was very valuable. It was so valuable that Roman soldiers, when coin was low, they would be paid in salt. It comes from, actually the word salary that we have comes from the Latin sal, for salt. It's valuable. It gives flavor. If there wasn't any flavor in any of our dishes, we wouldn't feel like eating them. The world is flavored by us Christians. We help make the world what it is. Aside from giving flavor, salt also preserves. If you're going to preserve anything in salt, the most important thing is that you have to spread the salt around. You have to coat it in salt completely. If you had a dish with salt, but the salt was all in one place, it'd be awful. It wouldn't work. Salt is meant to go everywhere. And again, we need to ask the question, what does this mean for us, especially providentially in the time that we find ourselves, so full of peril? In the Middle East, the Christians are experiencing this very same thing. Unfortunately, Christians are scattering. Things are getting worse and worse. But while Christians are leaving the Holy Land, they're going to somewhere. We have to see the hand of God in this. The people of God have been in situations like this before. When the first temple that the prophet King Solomon built in Jerusalem was destroyed, the people of God were likewise scattered. They were taken away from their home. They went to Babylonia, all these sorts of places, and they stayed there for a very long time. They were taken there not by choice, but by force. We as Melkites find ourselves scattered about in a similar way in all these different countries, where at best, people don't understand us, and at worst, they don't even know that we exist at all. Whether our families are even from the Middle East or not, we are all Melkites, and we're equally scattered about. We're in the same boat together. We find ourselves in the same predicament. But, as it happens, providentially, many of the places that we find ourselves are places that are experiencing a unique loss of faith and decency. While churches that have been long established in this country, for example, while their churches here are emptying, we're building new missions. We're having outreaches. Our places are growing. Slowly, but they're growing. There are only about 54 Melkite communities, both outreaches, missions, and parishes in the U.S., but there's no reason to think that we couldn't achieve more. Who's to say that within a generation we couldn't have 200 of these parishes? God is, after all, in the business of working miracles. For any of our efforts to make a difference in our communities, though, in our country, we need to let our light shine. There was once a young man who, as most young people, was very idealistic. He wanted to change the world. When he found out he couldn't change the world, he thought, oh, I'll change my country. He couldn't change his country, couldn't change his state, couldn't change his spouse. Try that. Try changing your spouse, see what happens. Couldn't change his family, but at the end of the day, he could only change himself. This is the thing that we're called to. We're called to cultivate the light that we already have. We cultivate it through prayer, through fasting, through regular activity in church, and growing in our faith. It doesn't need to be extravagant deeds, but more consistency. You don't need to throw a huge log on this candle to kindle it. You need to start small and work bigger. When the nations that we obviously find ourselves in, whether Australia, North America, anywhere else, as Melkites, when they look at us, they may unfortunately sometimes see the thing that St. Paul talks about in his epistle to Titus today. Anyone familiar with the church, when he hears, don't get involved in foolish controversies, genealogies, quarrels, or disputes about the law. We all know these situations, whether we're a part of them or not. It's human nature to dispute about things. Will they see us fighting over who's on the parish council? Will we be like St. Paul's communities, and instead of using our differences to get together, use our differences to divide a wedge, to prevent our faith from spreading? Oh, I'm Abu Swais, I'm from Beirut, I'm from Dimash, I'm from Miyumiyi, etc. All these distinctive parts of our heritage are blessings from God. They are very, very good. But if we allow them, or really anything else in our lives, to get in the way of spreading our faith, of growing our own faith, then that light will go out one way or another. Maybe not for us, but our children, certainly. God forbid. Don't mistake me, I'm not here to point any fingers, of course. This is a human problem. We are all guilty of this. We all have things to work on. This is something that every day we can make a new beginning of. We have the potential, instead of being Jiddu's church, Sitti's church, the church with the best food, even we are, of course, the church with the best food. Even if we're not known for these things, we could instead become known as a church of loving people, a church that welcomes the stranger, whoever they are, a church that helps the poor, a church where our neighbors know who we are. In some places, this isn't the case. We'll have these huge churches. Their neighbors have no idea who they are. It's a shame. But to put one final example, to show us an example of how great things can come from weakness, from a place of fear, a place of great trial, we providentially are given the example of the fathers of the first 6 ecumenical councils today. But for our purposes, let's focus on the fathers of the first. This was in the year 325. For the past couple hundred years, Christianity had been underground. It had been illegal. It was persecuted. 5 years ago, it was made legal, and then this council happens. As it happens, as soon as Christians are free, there's a problem in the church. Human nature again. But this time, a priest from Alexandria by the name of Arius had started the false belief that Christ is not God. This is a fundamental belief in Christianity. If Christ isn't God, then we don't have any place being here. We should pack up. But it was still in danger. Of the people that were summoned, the bishops of the church that were summoned to take care of this problem, there were 318 of them. They came from all over, some as far away as England, some as Spain. Everyone from the Christian world gathered there. 2 eyewitnesses, or second-hand resources at the least, Eusebius of Caesarea and St. Justin of Rome, recount the time that everyone was gathered for the council, the emperor had his seat, and everyone was only waiting for the bishops. But as they waited for the bishops, they saw some people being brought in on stretchers and chairs. At some point, people began to realize these are the bishops. These are the men who had suffered greatly under the persecutions of the recent past. Many had their eyes gouged out, had their tongues cut off, their hands were gone, they couldn't walk. Some had their backs broken, they couldn't move by themselves, and so they had to be ushered in. Anyone looking from the outside would have said these men were good for nothing. They were wretches. What can these men teach us? But really, it was an army of martyrs that they were bringing to this council. These men gave us what we know today is the Nicene Creed, something we recite every Sunday. We'll be reciting it again very shortly. If we live as we ought, if we do the least of these commandments that our Lord requires of us, if we don't give up, the only way to lose in the spiritual life is to not give up. No one's asking us to start off with a fireplace, a bonfire full of virtue, of a faith that's contagious. We need to start out with a spark and nurture it. But if we do what we're supposed to do, every day making a new beginning, we can grow the light of our faith. While we're very tempted to be afraid at the work before us, it's understandable. Again, we're in a new place. We're in a place where people don't understand us, if they even know we exist at all. But we need to remember that the victory has already been won. Christ has risen from the dead. He has trampled death and given to those in the tombs life. Christ has won the victory, but like any good general, any good king, he wants us to have a share in the spoils. Christ himself has told us, I have conquered the world. The world is ours. It is already ours. We only have to go take it. Glory to Jesus Christ.